So design thinking is what brought me to education. I'm a recovering engineer. And what really compelled me so much about design thinking was this possibility of a school being a place where teachers and students can work together on really, really wicked human-centered problems to make a dent in the world. But just believing in an idea or adopting a philosophy is a whole lot different than actually putting it into action. And I was struggling with this tension between the two. And so the model that works best for me to try to explain this was developed by a guy named Roger Martin. Roger Martin is the dean of the Rotman School of Business at University of Toronto. And he talks about two different ways of thinking. On one hand, there's analytical thinking. All right, this is where engineers live, thankfully, because they want things to be 100% reliable. This is why bridges don't fall down and planes don't fall out of the sky. Businesses live in this mode of thinking as well, because they want predictable results quarter after quarter, year after year. And I would argue that education, in most instances, lives in this realm too, because we want predictable results year after year, and this is maybe one of the reasons why we're so addicted to high-stakes testing and things like that. But to hear Roger Martin describe this graph, he sort of talks about this one side being the prove it side, right? Because these folks can prove results here and now. But the problem with prove it is that you can only prove what's already happened or what is happening now. And designers live in a completely different world, right? Designers are all about imagining a future that's different and hopefully better. So if you're a designer, you're working more in the realm of intuitive thinking. This is your gut. This is your passion. This is that belief that this idea is just awesome and I'm gonna do it. I don't care what anybody tells me. Now, on either side of this spectrum, it's probably not the right place to be, but Martin describes a 50-50 mix of the two, which is the sweet spot, and he defines that as design thinking. And so this is the paradigm that helped me start to realize how I might be able to bring this into the classroom. And it happened in a very serendipitous way about this time last year. So last summer I came across this organization called Enable. And what Enable does is they're a group of hackers, tinkerers, makers that use 3D printing to create prosthetic hands for people in need. And what's cool about these things is for about 50 bucks of material, you can create something that has about the same level of functionality as a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 prosthetic that you might get at a hospital with a doctor. And this was a moment where I said, what if my students did this? Let's go for it, right? Intuitive thinking. Let's make it happen. And it just so happened that our school had just bought 2 3D printers, and so this was going to be a great way to break them in. So Enable matched us with a young man named Alex. So Alex was 17 years old at the time. He lives about an hour outside of town. And our class was going to design a prosthetic hand for Alex. Now, Alex was born with only a partial right hand. He didn't have any of the major 4 digits and only a partial thumb. And so right off the bat, we had to start figuring out, how do we discover what the problem is? How do we craft an email to a stranger and convince them that we're gonna build this prosthetic from them? So this was the first sort of learning opportunity for us. And it wasn't long after that that Alex came to class and we met him. And in this very brilliantly awkward moment, we didn't exactly know how to approach Alex. We didn't know how to shake his hand. We didn't know what to do to fill the time and start the interview process. So we did what I think anybody would do. We asked Alex if he would dunk his hand into this bucket of cottage cheese-like goo, because we wanted to create a plaster cast of his hand that we could take measurements from and start the design process. But what was really interesting was that in this moment, these 3 or 4 minutes when Alex had his hand in this bucket of goo, he started telling us stories. And he said stories like, I've never tied my shoes with both hands before. And I've never held the steering wheel and a can of Coke at the same time before, right? And it was at this moment that we went from a project that Mr. Edwards assigned to the class to a purpose that we were all going to work on. And students went to work, and they did a really good job starting to print these hands. But what was interesting was the hand was actually only half of the design process. Students did a really great job of catching that insight. Did you catch it? He wanted to hold a can of Coke, right? That's different than just making the hand. And so we started experimenting with all of these DIY materials that might work as some sort of cushioning and grip element on the palm and the fingers. And then we coated our hands in blue paint, and we started grabbing random bottles and cups and things to see what part of your hand actually does the gripping. And this is all learning that I could never have planned in my class. It was just a fortunate happenstance of working with a user and going through the design thinking process. And we came up with two pretty awesome prototypes. So it was time to bring Alex back. We were going to try this thing on for the first time and see how we did. So Alex came back. The local news followed him. And in this moment on the screen on the left there, the cameraman is filming Alex putting his hand on for the first time. And it didn't quite fit. It really didn't work. Couldn't pick anything up with it. And what you don't see just out of the frame is not a bunch of students with their heads hanging low, feeling dejected, feeling like they failed. It was quite the opposite. It was a whole bunch of students grabbing that prototype back out of Alex's hand, tightening this, loosening that, ripping this apart. They were on version 2, just like that. So for me, this was a real fail up, fail forward moment. Now, eventually we got it right. We got a hand that we felt pretty good about. We delivered it to Alex right around Christmas time, put it in a cute little stocking. And just in case it didn't work, I went to the dollar store on the way to Alex's house, and I bought this robot claw, and the little trigger, and it makes the thing go like that, just as a fallback, just in case. But Alex is still using his hand. We were able to fist pump that day. He started practicing tying his shoes. And not long after that, I came across this blog. And you wonder if you make an impact, if this was just a cute project, or can a teacher and a couple students really make a difference? Alex in his blog started talking about things like, these people are changing the world. And I'm kind of like, yeah, not really. But he starts being really reflective about, what if this technology was around when I was in kindergarten? I might have been more accepted. I might have had more friends. I might have been more confident, right? How would that have changed the trajectory of Alex's life? And I was really impressed by Alex having that reflective moment. And for me, this was the moment of visible empathy for me. And it validated the idea that design thinking can make an impact, not only in your classroom, but in the community. So if I have a call to action for us, for all of us as a community of learners, if you're wondering, where do I start? How do I start with design thinking? It starts with a user. I've heard it 100 times already, right? But it doesn't have to even be somebody outside of your campus. Go find a lower school student. Go find somebody in the class next door. But these problems that are worth solving are everywhere. And there's no sense in us as teachers, as educators, inventing problems to be solved in our classroom, because there's millions of them right at our fingertips if you just talk to somebody. Thank you.